make sure my computer's working. It's slowed down. All right. My dear Wormwood, it seems to me that you have taken a great many pages to tell me a very simple story. The long and short of it is that you have let the man slip through your fingers. The situation is very grave, and I really see no reason why I should try to shield you from the consequences of your inefficiency. A repentance and a renewal of what the other side call grace, on the scale which you describe, is a defeat of the first order. It amounts to a second conversion, and probably on a deeper level than the first. As you ought to have known, the asphyxiating cloud which prevented your attacking the patient on his walk back from the old mill is a well-known phenomenon. It is the enemy's most barbarous weapon, and generally appears when he is directly present to the patient under certain modes yet not fully classified. Some humans are permanently surrounded by it, and therefore inaccessible to us. And now for your blunders. On your own showing, you first of all allowed the patient to read a book he really enjoyed, because he enjoyed it, and not in order to make clever remarks about it to his new friends. In the second place, you allowed him to walk down to the old mill and have tea there, to walk through country he really likes, and taken alone. In other words, you allowed him two real positive pleasures. Were you so ignorant as to not see the danger of this? The characteristic of pains and pleasures is that they are unmistakably real, and therefore, as far as they go, give the man who feels them a touchstone of reality. Thus, if you had been trying to damn your man by the romantic method, by making him kind of a child herald or Werther, submerged in self-pity for imaginary distresses, you would try to protect him at all costs from any real pain. Because, of course, 5 minutes genuine toothache would reveal romantic sorrows for the nonsense they were, and unmask your whole stratagem. But if you were trying to damn your patient by the world, that is, by palming off vanity, bustle, irony, and expensive tediums as pleasures, well, how can you have failed to see that a real pleasure was the last thing you ought to have met him with? Didn't you foresee that it would just kill by contrast all the trumpery which you have been so laboriously teaching him to value? And that the sort of pleasure which the book and the walk gave him was the most dangerous of all? That it would peel off from his sensibility the kind of crust that you have been forming on it, and make him feel that he was coming home, recovering himself. As a preliminary to detaching him from the enemy, you want to detach him from himself, and had made some progress in doing so. Now it is all undone. Of course, I know that the enemy also wants to detach the men from themselves, but in a different way. Remember always that he really likes the little vermin, and set an absurd value on the distinctness of every one of them. When he talks of their losing their selves, he means only abandoning the clamor of self-will. Once they've done that, he really gives them back all their personality, and boasts, I'm afraid sincerely, that when they are wholly his, they will become more themselves than ever. Hence, while he is delighted to see them sacrificing even their innocent wills to his, he hates to see them drifting away from their own nature for any other reason. And we should always encourage them to do so. The deepest likings and impulses of any man are the raw material, the starting point with which the enemy has furnished him. To get him away from those is therefore always a point gained. Even in things indifferent, it is always desirable to substitute the standards of the world, or convention, or fashion, for a human's own real likings and dislikings. I myself would carry this very far. I would make it a rule to eradicate from my patient any strong personal taste which is not actually a sin. Even if it is something quite trivial, such as a fondness for the country cricket, or collecting stamps, or drinking cocoa. Such things, I grant you, have nothing of virtue in them. But there is a sort of innocence and humility and self-forgetfulness about them which I distrust. To eradicate from my patient any strong desire. Even country crickets. Okay. Anyway. The man who truly and disinterestedly enjoys any one thing in the world for its own sake, and without caring twopence what other people say about it, is by that very fact forearmed against some of our subtlest modes of attack. You should always try to make the patient abandon the people or food or books he really likes in favors of the best people, the right food, and the important books. I've known a human defended from strong temptations to social ambition by a still stronger taste for tripe and onions. Remains to consider how we can retrieve this disaster. The great thing is to prevent his doing anything. As long as he does not convert it into action, it does not matter how much he thinks about his new repentance. Let the little brute wallow in it. Let him, if he has any bent that way, write a book about it. That is often an excellent way of sterilizing the seeds which the enemy plants in the human soul. Let him do anything but act. No amount of piety in his imagination and affections will harm us if we can keep it out of his will. As one of the humans had said, active habits are strengthened by repetition, but passive ones are weakened. The more often he feels without acting, the less he will be able to ever act. And, in the long run, the less he will be able to feel. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, the most alarming thing in your last account of the patient is that he is making none of those confident resolutions which marked his original conversion. No more lavish promises of perpetual virtue, I gather. Not even the expectation of an endowment of grace for life, but only a hope for the daily and hourly pittance to meet the daily and hourly temptation. This is very bad. I see only one thing to do at the moment. Your patient has become humble. Have you drawn his attention to the fact? All virtues are less formidable to us once the man is aware that he has them. But this is especially true of humility. Catch him at the moment when he is really poor in spirit, and smuggle into his mind the gratifying reflection, by Jove, I'm being humble. Almost immediately, pride in his own humility will appear. If he awakens to the danger and tries to smother this new form of pride, make him proud of his attempt, and so on, through as many stages as you please. But do not try this too long, for fear you will awaken his sense of humor and proportion, in which case he will merely laugh at you and go to bed. But there are other profitable ways of fixing his attention on the virtue of humility. By this virtue, as by all the others, our enemy wants to turn the man's attention away from himself to him, and so to the patient's neighbors. He wants him to think of their neighbors. All the abjection and self-hatred are designed in the long run solely for this end. Unless they attain this end, they do us little harm, and they may even do us good if they keep the man concerned with himself, and above all, if self-contempt can be made the starting point for contempt of other selves, and thus for gloom, cynicism, and cruelty. You must therefore conceal from the patient the true end of humility. Let him think of it not as self-forgetfulness, but as a certain kind of opinion, namely, a low opinion of his own talents and character. Some talents, I gather, he really has. Fix in his mind the idea that humility consists in trying to believe those talents to be less valuable than he believes them to be. No doubt, they are in fact less valuable than he believes, but that's not the point. The great thing is to make him value an opinion for some quality other than truth, thus introducing an element of dishonesty and make-believe into the heart of what otherwise threatens to become a virtue. By this method, thousands of humans have been brought to think that humility means pretty women trying to believe that they are ugly, and clever men trying to believe that they are fools. And since that is what they are trying to believe, since what they are trying to believe may in some cases be manifest nonsense, they can not succeed in believing it. And we have the chance of keeping their minds endlessly revolving on themselves in an effort to achieve the impossible. Yes, well. Dictation continues. To anticipate the enemy's strategy, we must consider his aims. The enemy wants to bring the man to a state of mind in which he could design the best cathedral in the world, and know it to be the best, and rejoice in the fact, without being any more or less or otherwise glad at having done it than he would be if it had been done by another. The enemy wants him, in the end, to be so free from any bias in his own favor that he can rejoice in his own talents as frankly and gratefully as in his neighbor's talents, or in a sunrise, an elephant, or a waterfall. He wants each man, in the long run, to be able to recognize all creatures, even himself, as glorious and excellent things. He wants to kill their animal self-love as soon as possible. But it is his long-term policy, I fear, to restore them to a new kind of self-love, a charity and gratitude for all selves, including their own, which they really have learned, when they have really learned to love their neighbor as themselves, they will be allowed to love themselves as their neighbors. For we must never forget what is the most important repellent and inexplicable trait in our enemy. He really loves the hairless bipeds that he's created. And always gives back to them with his right hand what he has taken away with his left. His whole effort, therefore, will be to get a man's mind off the subject of his own value altogether. He would rather the man thought himself a great architect or a great poet and then forget about it, than that he should spend time and pains trying to think himself a bad one. Your efforts to instill either vainglory or false modesty into the patient will therefore be met from the enemy's side with the obvious reminder that a man is usually not called upon to have an opinion of his own talents at all, since he can very well go on improving them to the best of his ability without deciding on his own precise niche in the temple of the frame. You must try to exclude this reminder from the patient's consciousness at all costs. The enemy will also try to render real in the patient's mind a doctrine which they all profess, but find it difficult to bring home to their feelings. The doctrine that they did not create themselves, that their talents were given them, and that they might as well be proud of the color of their hair. But always, and by all methods, the enemy's aim will be to get the patient's mind off such questions, and yours will be to fix it on them. Even of his sins, the enemy does not want him to think too much. Once they are repented, the sooner the man turns his attention outward, the better the enemy is pleased. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, I have noticed, of course, that the humans are having a lull in their European war, what they naively call the war, and am not surprised that there is a corresponding lull in the patient's anxieties. Do we want to encourage this or keep him worried? Tortured fear and stupid confidence are both desirable states of mind. Our choices between them raises important questions. The humans live in time, but our enemy destines them to eternity. He therefore, I believe, wants them to attend chiefly to two things: to eternity itself, and to that point in time which they call the present. For the present is the point at which time touches eternity. Of the present moment, and of it only, humans have an experience analogous to the experience which our enemy has of reality as a whole, for in it alone freedom and actuality are offered to them. He would therefore have them continually concerned either with eternity, which means being concerned with him, or with the present, either meditating on their eternal union with or separation from himself, or else observing the present voice of conscience, bearing the present cross, receiving the present grace, and giving thanks for the present pleasure. Our business is to get them away from the eternal and from the present. With this in view, we sometimes tempt a human, say a widow or a scholar, to live in the past. But this is of limited value, for they have some real knowledge of the past, and it has a determinate nature, and to that extent resembles eternity. It is far better to make him live in the future. Biological necessity makes all their passions point in that direction already, so that is Sorry. I thought there was a period there. It is far better to make them live in the future. Biological necessity makes all their passions point in that direction already, so that thought about the future inflames hope and fear. Also, it is known to them that in making them think about it, we make them think of unrealities. In a word, the future is, of all things, the thing least like eternity. It is the most commonly or completely temporal part of time, for the past is frozen and no longer flows. The present is all lit up with eternal rays. Hence, the encouragement we have given to all those schemes of thought such as creative evolution, scientific humanism, communism, which fix men's affections on the future, so that the very core of temporality, or on the very core of temporality. Hence, nearly all vices are rooted in the future. Gratitude looks to the past, and love to the present. Fear, avarice, lust, and ambition look ahead. Do not think lust is an exception. When the present pleasure arrives, the sin, which alone enters us, is already over. The pleasure is just the part of the process which we regret and would exclude if we could do so without losing the sin. It is the part contributed by the enemy and therefore experienced in a present. The sin, which is our contribution, looked forward. To be sure, the enemy wants men to think of the future too, just so much as is necessary for now planning the acts of justice or charity which will probably be their duty tomorrow. The duty of planning the morrow's work is today's duty, though its material is borrowed from the future. The duty, like all duties, is in the present. This is now straw splitting. He does not want men to give the future their hearts or place their treasure in it. We do. This ideal is a man who, having worked all day for the good of posterity, if that is his vocation, washes his mind of the whole subject, commits the issue to heaven, and returns at once to the patience or gratitude demanded by the moment that is passing over him. But we want a man hag-ridden by the future, haunted by visions of an imminent hell or heaven upon earth, ready to break the enemy's commands in the present, if by doing so we can make him think he can attain one or advert the other, dependent for his faith on the success or failure of schemes whose end he will not live to see. We want a whole race perpetually in pursuit of the rainbow's end, never honest, nor kind, nor happy now, but always using as mere fuel wherewith to heap the altar of the future every real gift which is offered to them in the present. It follows then, in general, and other things being equal, that it is better for your patient to be filled with anxiety or hope, it doesn't much matter which, about this war, than for him to be living in the present. But the phrase living in the present is ambiguous. It may describe a process which is really just as much concerned with the future as anxiety itself. Your man may be untroubled about the future, not because he is concerned with the present, but because he has persuaded himself that the future is going to be agreeable. As long as the real course of his tranquility, or as long as that is the real course of his tranquility will do us good, because it is only piling up more disappointment, and therefore more impatience. For him, when his false hopes are dashed, If, on the other hand, he is aware that horrors may be in store for him, and is praying for the virtues wherewith to meet them, and meanwhile concerning himself with the present, because there, and there alone, all duty, all grace, all knowledge, and all pleasure dwells, his state is very undesirable, and should be attacked at once. Here again, our philological arm. Here our philological arm has done good work. Try the word complacency on him. But of course, it is most likely that he is living in the present for none of these reasons, but simply because his health is good and he is enjoying his work. The phenomenon would merely be natural. All the same, and I should break it up if I were you, no natural phenomenon is really in our favor. And anyway, why should this creature be happy? Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. I guess it's short enough. Ha ha ha. These are long, aren't they? Yeah, I need a cigarette though. Dear Wormwood, mentioned casually in your last letter that the patient has continued to attend one church and one day since he converted. Excuse me. I would have stopped this video if I could. That's the kind of hypocrite I am. I don't like bad starts. We're not going to be a hypocrite. We're reading a story. I messed up the beat here with the cadence. Anyway, come to me, Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, you mentioned casually in your last letter that the patient has continued to attend one church, and one only, since he was converted, and that he is not wholly pleased with it. May I ask what you are about? Why have I no report on the causes of his fidelity to the parish church? Do you realize that unless it is due to indifference, that this is a very bad thing? Surely you know that if a man can't be cured of church-going, the next best thing is to send him all over the neighborhood, seeking for the church that suits him until he becomes a taster or connoisseur of churches. The reasons are obvious. In the first place, the patriarchal organization should always be attacked, because being a unity of place and not of likings, it brings people of different classes and psychology together in the kind of unity the enemy desires. The congregational principle, on the other hand, makes each church into a kind of club, and finally, if all goes well, into a courtage or faction. And in the second place, the search for a suitable church makes the man a critic where the enemy wants him to be a pupil. What he wants of the limited church is an attitude which may indeed be critical in the sense of rejecting what is false or unhelpful, but which is totally uncritical in the sense that it does not appraise, does not waste time in thinking about what it rejects, but lays itself open in uncommitting, humble receptivity to any nourishment that is going. You see how groveling, how unspiritual, how irredeemably vulgar he is? This attitude, especially during sermons, creates the condition most hospitable to our whole policy, in which platitudes can become really audible to a human soul. There is hardly any sermon or any book which may be dangerous to us if it is received in this temper. So, pray, bestir yourself and send this fool around the neighboring churches as soon as possible. Your record up to date has not given us much satisfaction. The two churches next to him, nearest to him, I have looked up in the office. Both have certain claims. In the first of these, the victor is a man. At the first of these, the vicar is a man who has been so long engaged with watering down the faith to make it easier for a supposedly incredulous and hard-hearted congregation that it is now he who shocks his parishioners with his unbelief, not vice versa. He has undermined many a soul's Christianity. His conduct of the services is also admirable. In order to spare the laity all difficulties, he has desecrated both the lectionary and the appointed psalms, and now, without noticing it, revolves endlessly around the little treadmill of his 15 favorite psalms and 20 favorite lessons. We are thus safe from the danger that any truth not already familiar to him and to his flock should ever reach them through Scripture. But perhaps your patient is not quite silly enough for this church. Or not yet. At the other church, we have Friar Spike. The humans are often puzzled to understand the range of his opinions. Why is he one day almost a communist, and the next not far from being some kind of theoretic fascism? One day a scholastic, and the next prepared to deny human reason altogether. One day immersed in politics, and the day after declaring that all states of this world are equally under judgment. We, of course, see the connecting link, which is hatred. The man cannot bring himself to preach anything which is not calculated to shock, grieve, puzzle, or humiliate his parents and their friends. A sermon which such people could accept would be to him as insipid as a poem which they could scan. There is also a promising streak of dishonesty in him. We are teaching him to say, the teaching of the church is, when he really means, I'm almost sure I had recently a Martian or something of that sort. Wait, hold on. It's not Martian. It's a periodical. Okay, the teaching of the church says, when he really means, I'm almost sure I read recently in Maritan or something of that sort. A magazine or newspaper. But I must warn you that he has one fatal defect. He really believes. And this may yet mar all. But there is one good point which both of these churches have in common. They're both party churches. I think I warned you before that if your patient can't be kept out of the church, he ought to at least be violently attached to some party within it. I do not mean on really doctrinal issues. About those, the more lukewarm he is, the better. And it isn't the doctrines on which we chiefly depend for producing malice. The real fun is working up hatred between those who say Mass and those who say Holy Communion, when neither party could possibly state the differences between, say, Hooker's doctrine and Thomas Aquinas in any form, and would, in any form which would hold water for 5 minutes. And all the purely indifferent things, candles and clothes and whatnot, are admirable ground for our activities. We have quite removed from men's mind what that persistent fellow Paul used to teach about food and other unessentials, namely, that the human without scruples should always be given to the human with scruples. We have quite removed from men's minds what that persistent fellow Paul used to teach about food and other unessentials, namely, that the human without scruples should always give in to the human with scruples. You would think that they could you would think they could not fail to see the application. You would expect to find the low churchmen genuflecting and crossing themselves, at least less weak consciousness of this high brother would be moved to him. God damn it, you people in the fucking 40s had a lot of words. Jesus fuck! You see, our intellectual capacities have really dwindled over the last 30 years. That's for damn sure. I don't even think my audience can understand this conglomerate of words. Screwtape, you have trained the demons well, I must say. Alright. You would expect to find the low churchman genuflecting and crossing himself, lest the weak conscience of his high brother should be moved to irreverence, and the high one refraining from these exercises, lest he should betray his low brother to idolatry. And so it would have been, but for our ceaseless labor. I did not understand that damn sentence one bit. I know it is a statement of humility. The poor guy, you would expect the poor guy to cross himself. You would expect the poor guy to do all the churchy stuff so that the rich guy would be moved to irreverence. He crosses himself so that the other guy's like, you're not doing the thing you're supposed to do. And the rich guy is refraining from doing the crossing himself, lest he should betray his low brother into idolatry. I'll do it like you because you did it. Dude, I'm sorry I don't understand this goddamn sentiment. It blows my mind. Anyway, and so such humilities with no higher low class, giving the seat to the one with poor clothes instead of the one with rich clothes. That's the simple principle that he's referring to here. But he put so many words on it that I'm frustrated now. Hey, without that, the variety of usage within the Church of England might have become a positive hotbed for charity and humility. Your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. Screwtape, we're taking a break from you because you are my intellectual superior. Goodbye. Not that anyone read this far.